very typical feature of video games are cheats, whose functions are to alter gameplay or make certain visual changes. In some, they're activated means where certain values are inserted. In others, by pressing specific buttons, or in already more complex cases, changing the game completely. And Plants vs. Zombies are no exception. All these tricks are activated by certain typings that we will have to do on our keyboard. However, there is a trick that makes the whole game change in a very drastic way, and not the good ones. Not only that, but another thing that differentiates this trick from others is that it cannot be activated at any time we want, but we have to write it in a specific part of the game. Today I'm going to tell you about a very strange experience I had with this game, which has to do with this supposed trick that I mentioned earlier. I hope not to make the terrible mistake of activating it again. It was approximately 9 p.m. I was on my laptop preparing to record my weekly PvZ gameplay. I had activated my screen recorder before I opened the game to make sure that everything was in order, and there was no incorrect configuration until then. Everything was perfectly normal, but once the game had finished loading, I was surprised that I was asked to create a new profile. At first, I got quite angry. I thought I had lost my progress permanently, and for no reason. However, I remembered that I wanted to back up my game, but apparently instead of copying the file from my game, I simply moved it to another place. I wanted to close the game too. Now yes, make the copy of my game and restore everything. But the game did not let me out. I had to necessarily create a profile to be able to leave, so I typed anything and it came out as U53rdv. And this was the first step to make I miss it begin. When I clicked accept, the screen turned black and a warning appeared that said the following. Warning, a command has been written to activate the developer mode of this game. Continue anyway? When I read that, I had been excited. I began to imagine all the possibilities I could have with developer mode. And without thinking twice, I clicked on it. Unexpectedly, the game closed. I assumed that this was due to the fact that it was necessary to restart the game in order to activate the developer mode. I was surprised to see the name and the icon of the game changed a little. Anxiously, I opened the game to see what changes there were. But the changes were totally different from what I expected. The game became very strange, even somewhat diabolical. At least that's how I realized it. Everything was distorted when I entered the menu. Everything looked unpleasant. The username was not the one I put, but it was replaced by developer ! Which I didn't find sense to. I saw everything. It was dark, quite unpleasant to be a rather innocent kids game. I don't know what the hell this had to do with developer mode. Unfortunately, human beings are too curious, so I started to see the game options to see what changes they had. They had all changed in an unpleasant way. All my game was complete. It was just as I had left it before this. But it was not normal. It was not normal for all these strange changes to be. I realized that in the icon of a Zen garden appeared a dialogue balloon, which instead of having the usual drop of water, it said, "Help." I clicked on it to see what I meant by that, but the game closed. I was afraid to open it again. I felt something bad was happening, but I did not want to stay with the intrigue that other things have changed. I decided to open the game again. Serious mistake. This time I decided to enter Crazy Dave's store. Luckily, I was able to enter without problems. However, Dave looked somewhat bugged. Had no body, only his head and arms floating in the air. He said nothing, he just stared, smiling. I went back to the main menu. As I was beginning to get nervous, I I was feeling that at any moment I was going to skip a screamer. Between the almanac, and this was what became the most interesting for me, since even the characters underwent changes. In the parts of the plants, the changes were not so drastic. Some had their normal design, others were crying or had a sad expression like pea shooters or sunflowers. Some, such as a chomper or spikeweed, had blood, and others, like squash, had their eyes blank. However, the zombies had a change in common, and that is they all had empty eyes, completely black, and some had blood on their faces. Finally, I entered adventure mode. When clicking the zombie's hand appeared as always, but the music and sound were heard extremely loud. It was a deafening noise that luckily did not last long. The screen turned black for a few seconds. After a little, it recovered. The garden also changed a little, since everything had a red filter. In this part, I was curious to see that it felt like playing a level with these changes. I chose my plants and started the level. At the beginning, the letters, instead of saying ready, set, plant, they said prepare to die. I got a little nervous, but I continued with the level. The first zombie appeared and I began to prepare my defense. Although there was a change and it was that the pea hit the zombie, it dripped a little blood. However, there is something more gloomy in that. And that is that when the zombies died, they left a puddle of blood in the place where they fell. This was already a Plants vs. Zombies game. Whoever made it too dark. This was already a Plants vs. Zombies or too dark. From there, everything continued normally. Nothing out of ordinary apart from the aforementioned changes. I even began to forget my fears. And I was beginning to entertain myself. This made me trust myself to such an extent that I thought that nothing bad would happen anymore. As I reached the end of the level, some questions still passed through my head, such as, why this gloomy aspect? Why the word help in Zen Garden? Why developer mode? I kept playing and finally I reached the last horde. It only remained to wait for the plants to eliminate the remaining zombies. At last I had completed the level. And when I clicked on the coin bag, the screen turned black and bite sounds began to be heard. The zombies had eaten all of my plants and out of nowhere I lost a level. Instead of leaving the usual message when you lose a level, bloodstains appeared all over the screen, and the scream seemed to never end. However, I realized that my laptop had been completely locked. I could not close it. Nothing, it was paralyzed. But for some reason, the recording was still working. I knew that sooner or later the blue screen would appear. I took out my cell phone and started recording. Finally, the blue screen appeared. Even though I was already waiting for it, I felt too afraid. I felt that something would appear on the screen at any time. And unfortunately, it did. The blue screen disappeared and suddenly an image of a deformed zombie jumped with a giant mouth and red eyes, with a loud and frightening background sound. Quickly, I tried to turn off the laptop forcefully, but it did not respond. Even though I pressed the shutdown button, nothing happened. While the image multiplied and deformed more and more, I managed to get the image and text to disappear. The sounds followed, changed and changed. Sometimes one was more horrible than the other. The laptop still did not respond, even if I kept pressing the off button. Already tired, I decided to close it with a strong blow. I had no other choice. Fortunately, I managed to calm it. I realized that my laptop had warmed up too much for obvious reasons. I didn't want to turn it back on. The next day, I took my laptop and touched it to see how it was. I couldn't believe it. It was still somewhat warm. but it was a temperature that I could stand being on, so with some fear I turned it on, hoping that none of the events of the previous night would have affected it in some way. For my luck and relief, I started without any problem. However, I immediately uninstalled the game and decided to avoid it for at least a few weeks. Afterwards, I started checking my email to see if there was something interesting, but to my horror, I received a message whose sender I could not believe. It was a user called U53rdv, the same name that I used to activate developer mode. The message was in English and translated. It said this: "You have discovered what game was going to be. You discovered what the game was going to be. I was one of the developers of Plants vs. Zombies. I wanted the game to look more realistic, but they rejected my idea. And after an argument, we got to the insults, and this made them end up firing me. In revenge, I hacked the computers where the game was developed to anonymously modify one of the versions of the game. Congratulations, you were the first victim to find my version. Now, as long as you have the game installed on your computer, and all your data will be sent to me. And do not bother trying to uninstall it, since once this email is marked as read, a virus will be installed that will force your computer to have the game installed permanently. Thanks for playing. Sincerely, U53rdv." Fortunately, I uninstalled the game before that alleged virus was downloaded when reading the email. Reading that message has made my desire to have the game less even more. And so far, I do not have Plants vs. Zombies, and maybe the absence of this game on my laptop for a while. This has been the worst experience I've had when playing Plants vs. Zombies, and I hope that not only with this game, but with others avoid going through something similar again.